Hi everyone, my name is Mark Boykins from Big Mountain Studio, and today I'm in Utah at the State Capitol building. It's a beautiful evening, the sun is setting, and I came here to record a intro video, but as you guys watch, you can just take a deep breath and relax and enjoy the yoga class. Looks like a lot of fun. Alright, keep watching, and I hope you enjoyed this next video. Bye. Hi everyone, my name is Mark Moykins from Big Mountain Studio. If you're interested in iOS development and learning cool stuff, then subscribe today and click on that bell icon down below so you can get notified when I come out with new iOS development videos. In the last video, we learned how to swipe to delete. Well, in this video, we're going to swipe the other direction, and we're going to learn how we can implement an edit feature. And when we click on this edit action, we want to be able to open up that pop-up that we showed before to add new trips. So we're going to swipe to the right, click edit, open up the modal pop-up, and modify the name or the image that goes along with this trip. Shouldn't be too difficult, so let's get started. Okay, before we begin, we're just going to go into Bitbucket and we're going to update our tasks. In the last video, we learned how to swipe to delete a trip, so that is done. And in this video, we're going to edit a trip by swiping the opposite direction. Okay, in the last video, you learned about swipe actions when we implemented this swipe to delete, but let me give you guys a quick refresher right here. Okay, when you swipe a table view row, whether it's to the right or to the left, there are two UI table view delegate functions that you can implement, either the leading or the trailing swipe actions configuration. In this case, we'll be implementing the leading swipe action to show an edit option. These delegate functions both return a UI swipe actions configuration, so let's talk a little bit about what that is. The swipe actions configuration is what holds your actions, or as you know in iOS, they're called UI contextual actions. So this UI swipe actions configuration is kind of like a container that holds an array of UI contextual actions. So what we're going to do first is create a UI contextual action for edit, and then we're going to add that action to the UI swipe actions configuration, and then we're going to return that. All right, great. So now that you've had a little refresher on swipe actions, let's go into the code and get this done. Okay, we're in our project here in Xcode, and just in case you're wondering, I did upgrade to Xcode 10. So the first thing you might notice is there's a warning here, and it wants us to upgrade to Swift 4.2. So let's just do that real quick. Okay, it wants to make a change in the TripViewController, and that's fine. And it wants to make a lot of changes down here. What you're seeing on the left-hand side are the changes it wants to make. So as you can see, it wants to it wants to add some functions and do some conversions. And what I'll do, I'll tell you what. Well, let's just look at the other change. Okay, here they're just adding a dot here because they probably took this string. This is probably just a constant, and they probably put this string into a structure. So this is the name of the structure, and this is one of the properties of the structure. They do that a lot with their constants, just to group them together. So that's fine. Let's save this. And then let's go into that class that it changed. Okay, so let's look at the changes that it made for our add trip view controller. And if we go down here, it made, you can see the changes it made with this bar right here. And this is pretty cool. This is also new in Xcode 10. It tells you changes that you've made since your last commit. So this is what it changed, this area right here. And it added this variable, and it's using this new convert function, which it added down here. But you know what, a lot of this we don't even really need. So let's just delete that. And I think I know what the problem is here. It doesn't know how to get the image anymore. And we can just use this right here. I think it's just playing it safe. It wants to play it safe. Okay, so I believe this is what it wants right here. We get the info, and we just have to look at this info key here and look at the different options that it provides. And you can do that by holding down Command and click on info key. We'll jump to the definition. Yeah, so right here, these are the different options, media type, original image, and that's what we want. We just want the original image, which is will return a UI image. So we have that here, original image. And as you know from enums, you can shorten them if we want. We can just delete this and go with original image. So let's just test that out, make sure it works real quick. Okay, the conversion updated the picking of an image, so let's just test that, make sure everything is still working fine. I want to say okay. Okay, and this is a good key to know that you're working with the new iOS version because it has a new picture here of flowers. So that looks fine, everything's working. And we could probably save that. We'll say this is San Francisco. How do you spell it? Cisco. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so that's working. So what I'm going to do at this point, before we move on, is I'm just going to make a commit. Oh, and there's one more thing I want to show you guys before I commit. In the video where I talked about picking from the photo library, we talked about this check that we do first, is source type available. And now it's because if the photo library was empty, it would return an error. And so we couldn't present the user with the photo picker because it would produce an error if the photo library was empty. Well, I found out, one of my viewers told me that as of iOS 11, that this no longer throws an error. And it'll still bring up the photo picker, but it'll just won't show any photos. So this is fine. We can delete this. It's no longer needed. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to delete that. We'll clean it up a little bit. I'm going to fix my indentation here. There we go. And I'm going to commit at this point. And I'll just say this is the Swift 4.2 conversion. And we'll push it to remote. All right, great. Now we can continue. Okay, so let's jump into our TripsViewController. That's where we have our swipe actions. And as you can see here in the last video, this is where we created our trailing swipe actions. So what we want now is the leading swipe action, which just puts it on the opposite end of the row. So let's create that down here. And I'll just start typing in leading. And there it is, leading swipe action, that first one. Hit enter, then we can start entering our code. Now again, as you can see, we return a UI swipe actions configuration. So what I'll do first is I'll just return this. And the swipe actions configuration, again, that's kind of like our container, right? We don't have any actions right now, so we're just going to return an empty array. And then we're going to add a swipe action and then stick it in here. So what we want is we need a UI contextual action that we're going to stick into this array. So let's create that for our edit action. And for the style, it's just going to be normal. You know, there's only two options. There's normal and destructive. We use destructive for the swipe to delete. String will be edit, and then we need the handler. So I'm just going to hit enter. And we have 3 parameters. This is new. Remember in the last video, when I hit enter, it deleted this part, but now it's saving it. So that's actually pretty cool. And last time, what did we call it? We called it action performed, right? So let's just use that same parameter name. There we go, action performed. And let's keep it consistent. What I did, instead of void, you can just use empty parentheses. I think that looks a little bit better, so I'm going to stick with that, empty parentheses. Okay, now what do we want to do? When the person taps on the edit button, what do we want to have happen? Well, we want to show our pop-up. And our pop-up right now is being controlled or being opened through a segue. So let's look at our storyboard for a minute here. It's right here. So it's connected to this button right here. This is our floating action button. And when you click on that floating action button, it opens up this Add Trip View Controller. So we want to perform this segue programmatically, right? We're not going to connect it to a button. So how do we do that? Well, it's pretty simple. We can just say perform segue. And it's this one right here. And you need the identifier. And if we look up, I think we can see what it is if we look at our segue here. Yeah, if the segue identifier is to the add trip segue. So we're just going to copy that. Whoa, not quite sure what happened there. Okay, and I'm just going to paste it in there. In sender, we're not going to pass anything in. I'll just use a nil for now. Okay, let's save that and let's test it and just make sure it works. This is still telling me the edit placeholder is in there. It's not. So I think that's wrong. Oh, this isn't going to work. We still need to add our, let's go back here. We still need to add our contextual action right here to our configuration. Okay, now let's run it. Okay, I swipe. I have the edit action here. It's a nice gray color. I'm joking, of course. And it shows our pop-up. Okay, that's fine. So notice too, when I click on this, it still remains open. And when I cancel out of it, it's still open. Well, we really want it to just kind of like go back after we're done tapping it. And do you remember how we did that with the delete? Because remember last time, remember last time when we showed delete and we clicked delete, it still persisted and still showed? Yeah, what we had to do was we had to call this action performed here and pass in true to let it know that we completed our action. So now if we run it, we should see it swipe back. So I come here, I click edit, and you notice it goes back. All right, that's fine. That's exactly what we want. Now you might not be too crazy about this color here, and you notice with the delete we put an icon in there. So let's add an icon to it to make it look a little bit better. And once we have our edit contextual action, we just add an image. And I did add an image. If we go to our Xcode assets here, I added an image right here. And this is a PDF, so it's a vector graphic. And some of the properties here is I have preserved vector data, and I just changed it to a single scale, so it's universal. Okay, so we're just going to edit image. And remember before in the previous versions of Xcode, you could just type in the name of the image and it would just come up here in the autocomplete. Well, that no longer happens in Xcode 10. And I think some of the people theorize that if you have a lot of images in your Xcode assets, it would clutter up, and sometimes a person would want one object, but they'd accidentally get the image. You can't get it anymore. So another way you can get it is just start typing in image literal. And this is kind of like how you do it with color literals, right? So you just start typing in image literal, then you double click it, and you just pick the one that you want. Okay, so we have our image, and now we want to give it a color too, right? And how do you do that? Well, you just use the background color. Now, notice we didn't use the background color for our delete swipe action, because when you make it destructive, when you make the action destructive right here, the style, it will give it the red color automatically. And when it's normal, it just gives it that light gray color, which who wants that, right? So let's add another color here. And let's just give it a blue. Maybe something brighter. Let's try this one. We'll see how that works. Okay, it sticks out more. It's easier to see the text, and the icon has a nice icon to go with it. But you know what? This is a new color that we don't have, and it doesn't really match our color scheme that we set up in a previous video when we were picking our colors. So one of the things that you can do is you might need to add a new color to your color theme. So let's explore and see how to do that. We're going to open up Google Chrome. We're going to open up a new window. And this is one of the websites that we went to when we picked our color scheme, one of the tools that we used. So we're going to use this tool again. And what you can do is we're basically going to paste in our color right here, and then we're going to lock it, and then we're going to click generate and find an appropriate color. So we need to get some colors from our project. It was in resources and color assets, and here's our color theme right here. So let's get our accent. We need to get the hexadecimal value of this color. Now before we'd bring up the custom color picker, and then we could go to one of the tabs in there and get the hex color. But now we don't really have to do that. We can just change the input method down here where it says floating point and change it to hexadecimal. And there, now you see a handy hexadecimal value. And this is great. So we're just going to copy that, and we're going to go back to our browser, and we're going to set some of these colors here. Okay, so there's one of our colors, and I have that locked. And that just basically means that when I click generate, it's going to change all these other colors, and it won't change our first color. Okay, so let's add our tint color now too. Click on tint, click on the color, change this to hexadecimal, and then we'll just copy that value right there and paste it here. I'm going to click return, click off that, and then I'm going to lock it. Now I'm just going to click generate until we find a nice blue color that matches our two colors here. Okay, here's a blue color. I think this will work. That looks like it matches our accent color. So let's copy this. And then what we can do is we can just add another color here and reference that in our code. So let's do that. Let's add a new color set. And then we'll need to give it a name. And maybe I'll just call it like edit. Okay, we'll click on the color, go to hexadecimal, and then we'll just paste it in there. All right, cool. There's our edit color. So we'll go back into our code and use that color now. And if you're using a named color, I don't think you can reference a named color in code yet. You know, like I don't think it converts it into, you know, a structure or an enum or anything like that. So we'll have to use the constructor here, named, and then we called it edit. If you guys know if there's a new way in Xcode 10, or if you notice anything I do that there's a new way to do it now using Xcode 10 or, you know, Swift 4.2, please let me know. And it'll really help me out, and it'll also help out your fellow viewers as well. Yeah, look at this. This isn't really showing up either. There we go. So still new version of Xcode. I'm sure there's little kinks they need to work out. All right, let's run this and see how it looks. Okay, it's throwing an error, and I'm not quite sure what the problem is here. Bad instruction. Yeah, so there might be some bugs still that we have here, which is too bad. If we look at the image, yeah, there's no image assigned. It's having trouble with this image here. I'm not sure why. Okay, well, I think I found out the problem is it didn't like the name. So there must be some kind of conflict here. I don't know if it's because maybe named colors can't have the same name as images. Maybe that's a bug, but to be honest with you, I'm not quite sure why that is. So it didn't like the name. What I had to do is I went into my Xcode assets and I added the word icon at the end. And again, it might be because you can't have resources with the same name, because I did call this edit. But you know, let's test that real quick. Instead, I'm going to call this edit color. And I'm going to go in here and change this back to edit. And let's go back into here. We'll call this edit color. And let's double click this. We'll select the pencil again. Okay, and let's see if that works. Yeah, it does. So I think that's the problem. I think it's just the resources here. I think it's if you have an image and a named color that have the same name, then we're going to get an error. It's going to have error initializing it because maybe all the names have to be unique, whether it's a new image set or a color set. All right, well, that's good to know. You learned something with me there. So let's continue on. Let's run the project again. Let's look at what we have. So when I click edit, we bring up the pop-up, but notice there's something missing here. It should say Russian trip, and if there's an image that goes along with it, it should show the image. So what we want to do is we want to populate it with the data that we already have. So how do we do that? Well, somehow this pop-up, which is actually a view controller, this view controller is going to have to know which index you're on. And then once it has the index, it can go and just fetch the individual trip that we need. So let's go into our view controller here. Okay, so here is the idea that I have. When the person clicks on edit, we want to save the index that we're on. And we can easily get that from the index path right here. And then when we come into the add trip view controller, we want to be able to set this property, much like we set done saving. We want to have a property here that holds the index that we're going to edit. So we'll call this tripIndexToEdit. and this will just be an int. And I'm adding a question mark there to make it optional. So it's going to be nil by default. And then when we come into our viewDidLoad, maybe here we can just take a look at that tripIndexToEdit. And if it has a value, then at this point, we know that we're going into edit mode. Otherwise, if it's nil, then it's going to be a brand new trip. So if there is an index, then we know we want to edit existing data. So what I'll do is I'll just get the trip, and we get that from our data class. Our data has an array of our trip models that are in memory right now. And we'll just use the index to get our trip. Simple as that. Now, once we have our trip, we can populate the image and the text. So for our text field, it's right here, trip text field. Let's just set the text. And then for our image, we just call the image view. And we'll set it to the trip image. Okay, so the question is, now how do we set this trip index to edit? Okay, if we come back to our view controller, here, notice we call performSegue. So when we perform this segue, this is where we're going to have to set that index, right? So in our segue, we instantiate, or we have our view controller. And from there, if I look at this now, we should see that new variable that we added, tripIndexToEdit right here. And so we want to set that to something. Well, one way that we can do it is we can create a variable up here on the view controller level. And so when we click this action, we could just set that variable. And then when the segue happens, it uses that variable and populates the trip index to edit. So let's do that. And you know, I'm just going to use the same name. There we go. Oh, we'll probably need self in there. Okay. Then after we set that property, we also set the done saving, which will reload our table. So now we just have to populate this variable right here. If we go back to our, let's make some more room here. There we go. Oh, this is another cool thing in Xcode 10, is I no longer have to add these extra lines because I couldn't scroll up before, but now you can in Xcode 10. So that is super nice. I'm glad they did that. Okay, so right here we could just set that property, and we just get it from our index path, and we just get it from the row. That's the index that we're on. All right, so let's try that. So what's going to happen is we're going to click edit. It's going to look at which row we're on, and it's going to set it to the view controller property, and then it's going to call performSegue. So then it will come up here in performSegue. It checks the identifier, and it'll get the index here and set it to the pop-up. And then in our pop-up, it'll load. It'll check to see if there is an index, and there is. And it'll get the appropriate trip, and then it'll just pre-populate the text field and our image view. Okay, so I swipe over, I tap edit, and there it is. It populated Russian trip. There's no image because there's no image down here. But what we can do now is we can add an image. And we'll use these nice flowers, and then we'll save. Now, this is kind of weird what happened. It created a brand new trip with these flowers. And the reason why I did that is because we don't have any code when we're saving. We don't have any code to know if we're going to update a trip or save a brand new trip. So right now, it only knows how to save brand new trips. It doesn't know how to update a trip. So this worked perfectly. And I just want to check real quick, if we click edit, if it will populate the flowers. And it does. It puts the flowers in there. So that's fine. Okay, so now what we need to do is we need to go into our save, and we have to tell it, hey, do I want to modify a trip or update a trip, or do I want to insert a new one? So as you can imagine, here's our create trip right here. As you can imagine, we're going to have to look at this trip index to edit, because that's kind of our indicator to know if we're going to be modifying or inserting a new trip. So I'm just going to use this same code. And if we do have an index, that means we're going to be modifying, else we're going to be creating a new trip. Okay, so let's look at our trip functions and see what we have for updating. I think we do have a function, trip functions, and we have one for update trip right here. Now this really isn't going to work the way we have it here, because what we need to do instead is we don't want to pass in a trip model. Just because it has a trip model, it doesn't know what index we have to remove it at or update or replace it with. So what we want to do is we just want to update an existing one. So there's three pieces of data we're going to have to pass in. We're going to have to pass in the index that we're on, the new title, and the new image. So first we'll have to go into our trip functions and update that function here, update trip. And the first thing we want is an index. So we'll say update at index, and this will be an integer. Then we want our title and our image. And remember, the UI image that we pass in, we may or may not have an image, so I'm going to make it optional. Oh, you know, it doesn't know what a UI image is because we probably, we're not importing the UI kit. So let's import the UI kit, and that should go away. Okay, great. And how are we going to update it? Well, we'll just look at our data again, and it has our trip models locally, and we'll just get the appropriate index, so that will return the trip, and from here we can update the image or the title. So let's start with the title, and then we'll do the same thing for the image. Okay, now for our app, it's super simple. It stores everything locally, and it's in cache. You wouldn't want to use this for a production app. This is just for demonstration purposes. Normally in a function like this, what you'll probably do is go on a background thread and you'll send this data to make an update to a remote repository, or maybe core data, or maybe you have some other repository like Couchbase that you can store locally and have it sync up later. The choice is up to you. But this series does not cover data sources, so I'm just keeping it as simple as possible. Okay, so let's look at that update trip again. And we're going to use this one. Okay, at index, we have the index here. We know it's not null. And for the title, I'm just going to use new trip name. The new trip name is the validated text. That just makes sure it does actually have a value and it's not nil. So I'm going to use new trip name. And for the image, I'm just going to get the image view image like we do here. Okay, so let's try that. Okay, I come in, I edit, and we have our Russian trip. I save, it doesn't create a new one. Okay, that's good. So let's edit again. And let's add an image this time. And we'll use this leaf here. Change the title a little bit. There we go. Okay, so it works. So now we can delete it and we can edit it. All right, awesome. So now let's commit our changes because everything's working the way we want it to. And we'll push it to Bitbucket. All right, great. All right, guys, good job. We got our swipe to edit implemented. And now for some bonus content, I'm going to show you just a little animation on how when we do an update, it can animate the cell that we just updated. So we'll go into our project, and this is pretty simple. I'm just going to go into the cell. And basically all I'm going to do is I'm going to animate the image when the image gets updated. So it's basically just going to look like this. First, I'm going to check to see that we have a trip image. And then I'm going to fade out the image a little bit. And then what I'm going to do is animate the alpha back to 1 with the new image. Okay, we don't need this anymore, so we'll delete that. And then we're going to include an animation to bring the alpha back to 1. So it's going to look like the image is fading into view. And we'll do it over 1 second for the duration. I'll hit enter. and we'll bring it back into view by setting the alpha to 1. So let's just see what that looks like. It's very subtle, but it's these little subtle animations that can really add to the user experience. Okay, no image. We come to edit. We'll add an image. And watch when I click save. You notice it fades into view. So if you come in here and you update that image, it might even be more noticeable. Yeah, there we go. So it's just a slight animation, to bring the new image into view. Okay, great guys. You learned a lot of cool stuff in this video, including how to implement a leading swipe action, how to call a segue programmatically, finding more matching colors for your theme, how to use the color.io website and add your colors. We also looked at the new named colors and how to get a hex color from it and how to add a hex color to it. And then I showed you a little bit about animation and just showing the new image to give it a little bit better user experience. All right, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like. Consider sharing it with your friends and subscribe so you can see more videos like this. If you want to help out, you can provide a translation in your native language. You click on the 3 dots down below and provide a translation. And just provide a translation for the title and description. Don't worry about adding subtitles because that is way too much work. All right, thanks guys.